Okay, so again, today we're just gonna open up to anything, and we'll try the best and try to get your questions answered on anything Dynamics 365. So again, my name is Mitch Milam. I'm a free-range Dynamics 365 CRM architect. You can reach me at one of those methods there. Again, you can raise your hand today to actually ask a question, or just type it into the question box. So webinars, I need to update my webinar page with the last couple there. So that's where you can find the webinars coming up. Knowledge Bits is where we get some drip information, tips and tricks for different things. And then, of course, I have some learning plans and some other things that are actually coming out here shortly. I'm about to move all of my utilities that I sell for Dynamics 365/CRM over to my XRM coaches. I'm just going to redirect CRM accelerators over to that site. So that'll happen within the next probably couple of weeks or so, hopefully next week. Okay, so here's what we're doing. This is a service that I have been trying to get out for about 6 months here, and I'm actually very slow, as you know. So what we're going to do is I am going to start a new thing called Ask Mitch. And so what this is when you have questions about Dynamics 365 and you're just kind of curious of the answer. Now, we're not in problem solving mode in this thing, like this thing today. So we're not, we can't solve problems, but if you have questions about how things work, this is the idea. So what I'm going to do, and I'll get everybody's permission to ask the question, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a page on my site that you can type in your question. And then what I would like to get to is a point where I can actually post these once a day. So 5 a week of questions and answers that I did this. I stole this idea from a guy named Pat Flynn, who has the Smart Passive Income podcast. He has another short podcast called Ask Pat, and people leave a voicemail on a system, and then he plays the voicemail and then records the answer to the question. And I thought that would be, as a podcast, believe it or not, and I thought that would be kind of interesting to do from a Dynamics 365 perspective. So I'm going to do that. So I'm going to do it in writing instead of just doing a podcast. So anyway, so the idea again is you fill it out, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to take these questions and put them into that so we can see what's going on with that. And then from now on, because I'd actually asked everybody about this end of last year, I think, what they thought about it, and I got some pretty decent feedback. So that kind of encouraged me to kind of go down this path. Okay, so let's get into the question. So Ken Champion asked one. He actually sent me an email the other day when I asked about this. Is on-premise going away? No, Ken, on-premise is not going away. So believe it or not, there are still people who like to install $5,000 servers and maintain those $5,000 servers and pay for a lot of people to maintain those servers. So Microsoft would love you to go to the cloud because that's where everything is headed. So it moves the onus of backup and maintenance and things like that to somebody else. Somebody still has to do it, of course. But I do not see that happening anytime soon. There are just still too many people that have needs or requirements to have the data on site. For various reasons. It could be anything from just, I've got a customer like, oh, we got a data center. So, moving to Azure or CRM Online is really not going to save us anything because we're always going to have the data center and we're always going to have these, spaces that have to be filled up by something. So that's a thing there. So I don't think it's going anywhere. The big problem that you're going to run into that we have today is all of the newer technology is coming out only online. Okay. So in many cases, they do have connectors to on-premises, like for Power BI, for instance. That's a thing. But a lot of the Azure stuff only speaks to CRM Online or Dynamics 365 Online. So at some point, that could become a problem if you're trying to get the data integrated with Azure resources. There are ways around it and stuff, but for the most part, everybody wants to go to the cloud. But I don't think on-premises is going away anytime soon. Let's see. Sanford asked a whole big question. Let me be sorry for that. So Sanford asked a question about too much stuff tied to a field. Okay, so you got JavaScript, you've got business rules. workflows, background, or otherwise, custom workflow activities, plugins. When does the data need to change and when does the user need to see it? Will the change need to affect all the records in the instance? That's kind of a complicated question, Sanford. Let me give it a shot. So basically, part of this question is related to, do you use business rules or do you use JavaScript to make client-side decisions? So both have their pluses and minuses. The biggest problem I have with business rules from a technology standpoint is there's no context to the state of the record. And so what happens is there's no check at the very beginning of the business rule to say, is this form in an update state or is this form in a new state? I saw an article about a month or so ago, and I cannot remember who wrote it, but they were talking about looking to see if the ID of the record had been populated with data. If it had, it was an update. If it did not, it was a new record, and then you could just not do stuff or do stuff based on that decision. So that's the biggest problem I have. The other thing that's very hard for a lot of us to get our hands on is we see something weird happen and we don't automatically think, I wonder if there's a business rule applied to this. That has bitten me in the butt. I can't tell you how many times where a customer will go in and create a business rule and then magic happens, and magic is bad. I think we've all talked about this multiple times. Magic is bad. So things magically happen and you can't figure out why, and go check your business rules to see if they're there, because it's a good possibility. When you have JavaScript, now JavaScript is executed at a different place and time than business rules are, and they can kind of conflict if you're not careful. Okay, so that's one thing to think about. But the other thing about using a JavaScript only solution is you know where your code is. You're not relying on Microsoft to do stuff. So you know everything is in the places you tell it to look at, and you can visibly see those things, and you don't have to worry about things interfering with each other, because the way that the business rules / JavaScript work, they can actually counteract each other if you're not careful with it. So in most cases, I really like one or the other. When you start having both of them applied, it creates some very interesting issues. Another thing about business rules is you can have the business rule apply at the entity level. So that means it happens at the server. And unless they've changed it, what also happens is, even though you have it applied at the server level, so that means when you have something change on a field, it will apply to the record. But when the record is opened, that same business rule will execute again. And the bad problem with that is it will generate a dirty state for the record, even though the user hasn't done anything for it or to that record. When they open it, they just open it to look at it. And what happens is, when they navigate away from it, they're like, would you like to save your changes? And they're like, I didn't make any changes. I just opened the thing up. Okay, now you're confusing users. And as we discussed, confusing users make phone calls, and phone calls are bad. So when you have all these things together, you really need to kind of, have an overall strategy. What did Sanford use? Based on my support of an experienced instance of Dynamics 365/CRM, what he's talking about is somebody has modified the heck out of it. And sometimes when you come into a situation, you have to ask yourself, what the heck were they thinking when they did this? Sometimes they weren't thinking. Sometimes you have multiple cooks in the kitchen. Sometimes those cook leave. Sometimes they learn. So, and then quite honestly, that cook in a lot of times is you. So the things you go through as a customizer, or developer, or an architect, or an administrator, you hopefully are learning every day, and so that will help you get toward the goal of making yourself a better person, and hopefully your CRM a better person at the same time. So that's a long-winded answer, Sanford. I hope that got it for you. Ken asked another question here. For those of you who SQL heavily for query on-premise data for advanced analysis for results greater than 5,000 records, what tools do you recommend? Well, quite honestly, Ken, when you start doing analysis, you need to get the data out of the CRM database. The CRM database is not the place that you do analysis, okay, in most cases. You really need a different data store. So what most people do is they will take the data, they will flatten it out by using the SQL filter views, which flattens everything. It gives you the textual and other representations of the data. and then put that into a data warehouse. That's where your analysis is performed, because any kind of analysis will actually degrade the system to some degree, because the types of transactional data that's normally occurring versus analytical queries will counteract each other, and it will slow the entire system down. So most cases, what you do is you put them somewhere else. So whether it be Power BI or things like that, that's what a lot of people are doing. They just copy it to a different data store and they work on it from there. Because when you get into that, a lot of times what happens is you have the separate data sources that you're actually doing analysis on. So it's not just the CRM data. It could be other data from other systems. So you put them to what they call an operational data store or an ODS for analysis there. That's what I would do. Larry asked a very complicated question. Larry Lentz of MVP. What's the difference between project service automation, and field service? So project service, I think Larry meant to say project server. So project server, let me back up for a second. So let's go through the entire family. Microsoft Project is a desktop application that you install, and it manages a project. Project Server is a website that you can manage multiple projects on, and then consolidate the data into a single view of all projects throughout the system, so that you can do analysis and things like that. Project Server Automation, or PSA, is a component that fits into Dynamics 365 that allows you to do project management from within Dynamics 365. It can both read and write Microsoft Project files, not Project Server, but project files. And then you can use Dynamics 365 and PSA to actually manage your projects and your resources in a way that's a little bit different than Project Server. Field service is strictly for people who go to places and do things. You're probably the most common thing that you could think of is I have AT&T coming out to install UVerse, or I have DirecTV coming out to install a dish. So things like that. So those are the people who you can actually schedule and do things. So basically, field service is a very, very large package that does a lot of things. Part of it is scheduling work. Part of it is recording work to be done. So what can happen is you pull in stuff from the case system, and then you can create a work order. The work order goes out to one or more individuals. They can get a real-time scheduling optimization. So what happens in a lot of places is when the person, say the technician, gets in there at the beginning of the day, they open their mobile app on their tablet, and it says, okay, go to 123 Main Street and install this device. And when you get done with that, you go over here and do that. And what happens is, the way that the automated scheduling is built into field service these days is that can be changed on the fly. And the idea is they're trying to perform what they call route optimization. So I need somebody to go from point A to point Z in as few steps as possible and stop along the way and do work as you're going in that direction, whether it be a straight line or a circle. And the idea is you want to try to minimize the amount of travel time and hops and things like that. So that's the general idea behind field service. It's truly field service personnel. So again, you have trucks that go places with people inside them that do things, and you can schedule those things and other resources to make sure that the job gets done. You can further enhance that by having what they call connected field service, where you can use an Internet of Things or an IoT device to actually send a signal to the Azure Event Hub, which can actually, after a little bit of work here and there, can end up inside of Dynamics 365. We can generate a work order, and what would happen after that is the device actually tells you, I've got a problem, and the system will automatically schedule somebody to come out and fix it with no human intervention at all. Okay, so that's a really cool thing. I actually did a demo on that at Ignite last year in Atlanta, so that was pretty cool. Kurt asked me something I don't know the answer to. I've heard the expression of a blended user license. It's a combo of 2 licenses. I have no idea what that is, dude. No idea at all. If anybody else knows, then put a comment in the box. So Felix is asking about developing apps using Power Apps and Microsoft Flow to create workflows across multiple platforms. Um, is there any place to start? There are a lot of examples. There's nothing comprehensive, Felix, that I know that goes from start to finish, but there are a lot of examples out there. There's the External Virtual group just had a meeting, I think this week, maybe it was last week, to talk about using Azure Functions as a way to do stuff. I actually, speak of Internet of Things, this is kind of crazy. There's a button called a Flick, F-L-I-C. It's an internet-enabled button that talks to your smartphone. And I actually use Microsoft Flow. They have a Flow connector. So I did an example for a customer the other day where they pushed a button. It sent a signal to my phone, which sent a signal to Microsoft Flow, which created a task inside of Dynamics CRM 365, which was picked up by the gamification system and added a point to the user's record. So that's a blog article I'm about a quarter of the way done with, but that's the kind of thing you can do. So it's not rocket science. It's also not 100% complete. It's about a 85% solution. Flow is. Power Apps is a totally different deal, so we'll just talk about Flow at the moment. So Flow is a way to do things to move data between systems. That's what it's meant for. So something will happen in one place that will fire it off, and then you will go to another place to actually do something. So Flow is really good about moving data. So like I said, what I just would describe was taking an event that occurred, a physical event, creating a record within Dynamics 365. So there was 3 pieces there. And then when you work with a Power App, so a Power App is a way to create an application that will run on different platforms, including mobile. And then what happens with that is a Power App is the user interface. To move data into different systems, it actually uses Flow behind the scenes, with the trigger being the Power App itself. So that's a pretty good way to actually do stuff. So again, what I did in this is I created a Power App, and when they pushed a button, it actually created a Dynamics 365 task, and then that got picked up by the gamification system to add a point to the user for completing a task for the day. So there's lots of examples out there, but there's really not a comprehensive thing. And quite honestly, I just haven't had time to create a new class for that. That's on my list along with about 50 other things. So it's kind of toward the bottom. I'm sorry, Felix. Okay. Vladimir has a question, a big one. Let me see what happens here. See, it says, we have a team that basically do sales and handle orders. My question is, if they choose Dynamics 365 for sales as a CRM, we'll be able to do order management with it too, currently handled by sales reps in AX5. Secondary question. Okay, let me answer that one first. Yes. So Dynamics 365 for sales should handle the sales, marketing, and orders. They're all part of that. And then what you could do, I don't know about the AX5 part, but depending on how it's set up, you could actually possibly have a flow that would push the data into AX, or you could upgrade to Dynamics 365 for operations, which is the online version of AX, and you could for sure put a flow together that would copy up to the common data service, as they call it, which is the intermediary database between Dynamics 365 and 365 for operations, and that would actually put the data, and it would be pulled into from one system into the other. So that would work there, absolutely. Secondary question is, the data model for 365 relevant to my question if we migrated to operations, which is I just answered. Yeah, so basically the way it works right now, there's 3 databases. So Dynamics 365, which is the CRM portion, has its own database. Dynamics 365 for operations, which is the AX portion, has its own database. Then there is a third database called a common data CS, the common data service. And what that is just a holding place to move data back and forth between the two. So right now you have to create your own flows to move the data in and out of both systems. But I've seen a roadmap, I think, that actually shows they're actually creating a connector that will actually utilize the common data service to actually move the data automatically. That's not out yet. We're coming up on an update here in the next couple months. Don't know exactly when it's coming, but soon. And they started to show different things. I would bet it's somewhere in that time frame because that's kind of a big enough chunk of something that they would put that into a major release. John asks, we are migrating to Dynamics 365 later this year. What languages markets does Microsoft support? We're a global org, and user tongue includes Mandarin, Spanish, and Portuguese, etc. John, if I'm not mistaken, it's between 36 and 56 languages that they support. It's actually, if you go out, if you just type that string in like Dynamics 365 language support, it'll come up with a list, but there's a lot of them, and all the ones that you're talking about are in there. So that should not be a problem at all. Okay, Rob asked a very complicated question. Let me read this first. Let's say you have a managed solution and you want to uninstall one dependency is on the case solution entity. It's only mapped into the case's primary field to the entity's primary field incident ID. That cannot be uninstalled because you have to remove that relationship. Would you recommend deleting the actual solution's entity to facilitate uninstalling the solution? Oh boy, that depends. That's kind of a tricky one there, Rob. So if you're trying to remove a managed solution, but you have a dependency on an unmanaged component, I think it probably won't let you, is what the issue is. So I don't know how you would get around that without losing data. Is my problem, because if you delete that attribute, the field's gonna be gone. Therefore, the data is gonna be gone. But if you don't care, you could do that. You could delete the relationship and delete the field as well, the lookup field, and then you could remove your unmanaged solution. Okay, so Ken circled back with another thing on the analysis. Basically ad hoc support analysis. Yeah, Ken, you can do that, but quite honestly, when it comes to the 5,000 limit, that's just 5,000 at a time. There's all kinds of tools you have that will pull all the data back. You just have to loop through it. Is the deal. And Margaret commented on Kurt's question. Kurt, were you talking about a dual use license? If that's what you're talking about, that is where you can purchase Dynamics 365 online and also use it on premises legally. That's what that means. Thanks, Margaret. Farad asks about project service on-premise CRM. No idea whatsoever if that's ever going to happen. That may be on a roadmap somewhere. I'd go out to the Dynamics 365 roadmap and take a look at that. I have not heard anything about that. It's just a solution that gets installed, so I don't see why it wouldn't work. But right now, it has to go through the app source, and I don't think app source works with on-premises, but I have not tried it. So John asked a good question. Can reports be scheduled by one user to be delivered to a list of other users? And if so, will those users receive those scheduled reports and view only data when they are permitted to see, or if they see the report, is it visible to those who schedule it? Well, first off, why in the world would you want to schedule a report? There's a good question there. So if you're taking a snapshot and you don't want live data, that's a valid example of that. So what happens is if you generate a report and it's a snapshot and it creates something like a PDF, then your secondary question there about the security is not going to apply because it's just going to be a document, right? If you have a view, which is the primary way to do it, then any data that they see that they are have security to see will be seen. So if they don't have access to certain records, they will be missing. But you can't do a snapshot like that. Is the problem. Sanford asks, isn't flow based on the number of transactions? Yeah, there's some kind of weird limitation in there. I'm really not sure where it is, quite honestly. John asks, when exporting a report to a PDF, it appears that it is rendered as a version of Word or Excel template. Can you control the PDF output? No. Anything that comes out of CRM, it is what it is. So if you need some very specific stuff, what I would probably do is recommend, going with like a Power BI thing if you can. Or if you're just after like rows and columns, you can use the document core pack from MSCRM add-ons to generate a document, and that would give you better control than the current template system we have. That's what I would use. Hugh asks, is conditional formatting available within a view in Dynamics 365? No, it is not. We can add icons to certain things that will give you a little bit more class. Now that being said, Param showed some of the different UI components or UI look and feel that they're coming out with the next release. And I think that they're going to start this on the business edition first, not the enterprise edition that we have right now. So I don't know if you may want to go hunt down the presentation. I think it was one of the European conferences is where they were talking about that. I don't know if the conditional formatting is going to be in that. I know the look and feel, the screenshots I've seen are different. So they may have that coming, but right now, not really. Yeah, like all past due activities being read. That is something we've actually done in the past. We would do some kind of unsupported JavaScript to do that stuff. What you can do, look up, see what the keywords would be. Look up icon grid and icons, Dynamics 365 grid icons, and what you can do is there's a couple different. I think Nick Dolman had a really good. I think it was him had a really good article about how to add icons. So what you do is you create some web resources, so like a red light, green light, yellow light, and then you put a piece of JavaScript in there. So when a certain record is in a certain state, it would actually add the web resource to that field. So it would show it beside it. So that's how you do it. I will put a link to that in the article that I create for this. So that's a great question, and we get that all the time. Quite honestly, all the time. EG says create a report in SSRS and use installed fonts in PDF version. Where the report loses a font and they get misplaced with generic replaced with generic fonts. Man, that's an SSRS question. That's really not CRM. So the issue there is when you create a PDF, you have to have the ability. The technical term is include embedded fonts, is what it says. And if we don't include the embedded fonts, then it will roll back to a system font that matches as closely as possible, which in most cases is going to make your report look like crap. So that's an SSRS problem. That's really not CRM. So unfortunately, I don't really have an answer for that. Okay. Let's see. Ken had a couple other questions. Anything else? That's good questions there, guys. Ladies. Kurt, did you get your question answered? Get your hand up. You want to talk? No. Okay. Okay. Let me. I'll unmute you. Hang on. Okay, Kurt, you're live. Go ahead.
Good morning. How you doing, Anthony?
Good, buddy. How are you?
Okay, so self-service customer portal. I haven't had a chance to mess with it that much yet. Somebody asked me if they could push data out to that self-service customer portal from CRM, some means of, for instance, like generating a query and resulting of the query, pushing that out into, let's say, an Excel spreadsheet from a a query in advanced find or something like that.
Right.
So this way, on a scheduled basis, the customer will get updated data. And it's kind of like it ties into the idea of scheduling a report in CRM. Why would you want to do it since it's not exactly live? But then I guess, there's certain kinds of cutoff dates and certain kinds of information and certain business processes that require that.
Okay. That's good. Yeah, like I said, the only time I've ever seen it is when they do a snapshot, and so it's like a sale. So show me like Monday morning, show me the sales for last week, and so it's a snapshot in time. Is basically it's technically a historical document, but most time if you can just get by with doing a view because that's less work. People always have access to data, but it's not a snapshot; it's a live thing. So thanks, Kurt.
Okay.
Okay, John asked a question. When a user is deactivated, will the records still be accessible and factor into reports, or do they need to be reassigned prior to deactivating their profile? No, nothing happens to the records, and they'll still be pointed to that person. It's just you probably need to have a practice in place where you actually push the records to a different user. Some very interesting things can happen if they are owned by somebody who is not an active user. Most of the time, an error occurs. This is especially prevalent when you have workflows, and you'll get a very odd security message that may not make any sense. And when you track it down, you find that what happened to the user was deactivated, and it's giving you I can't remember what the actual error message is, but it's something to the effect that the record's unavailable in some cases. And it really depends on the operation you're trying to undertake. But usually you need to have a way of reassigning. Be very, very careful doing the from the user. There's a button on the command bar that says reassign all records. Be very, very careful with that. What will happen is if depending on the number of records they own, it could take forever and then time out and then totally kind of go crazy and not do things. So, and take the system down. That can also happen depending on the version of CRM you're using and the number of records we're talking about. So, it's best to just kind of be careful with it, and just you can deactivate them, but then you need to reassign the records, some way. So just keep that in mind. Sometimes it's better to just do an entity, if you kind of know where everything is, do the biggest ones in just kind of groups. So you can do an advanced find search for that. Anything else? Let's see, John asked, can we report on the learning path usage for which users assess which support section pane? John, that's a great question. I actually did one article and I didn't have time to do a second one because I just didn't make the time. But I need to investigate that. That is a great question, because that comes up a lot. If I'm not mistaken, that data is actually recorded somewhere. I thought I saw that in the metadata worksheet in the SDK. I thought that they actually recorded that, but I haven't looked at it, and I for sure haven't actually gone and verified that they actually wrote it out. Because sometimes they'll prep for something and they won't actually get around to doing it in version 1, so maybe it comes later. But that's a good question. Let me go check on that. Sanford mentioned, I talked about the timeout there for the reassign. Is there any way to adjust the timeout setting online? Not to my knowledge. That's a system setting, so I don't know how you would do that. That's actually done at the SQL level. So the old days we would put a registry key in there, but we don't have access to the registry on online, and I don't think they do either. You can always ask support, quite honestly. Oh, okay. Vanu has a question. Let me unmute you. Okay, Vanu.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
Okay, quick question regarding something regarding the security. So, if somebody like a financial institution is considering Dynamics 365 online, then how about the security of the data that can be ensured?
Okay, that's a great question. There is actually, and I don't have it, but I'll put it in the answer there. There is actually a complete security and privacy document out on TechNet that describes what that is. It's secured at rest these days. It's encrypted at rest, so it's actually encrypted on the database, or sorry, on the disk. And then, of course, since it uses SSL to communicate with the browser or anything else that talks to the database, it's encrypted on the wire. So it's encrypted the entire time that people have access to it. So that should not be a problem. And remember, the way that the Dynamics 365 is architected, every customer has their own database, and they cannot see the other databases unless they have access to those, which they don't, especially in the online environment. So it's never a question of data accidentally getting cross-pollinated into different organizations.
Okay, so and another question regarding, so Microsoft is planning for everything, just grabbing towards the online and integrating everything, Office 365, SharePoint, ERP and everything. So they are getting hold of everything centralized online to their ecosystem. So what do you think from now onwards, say after 5 years, what will be the cost of user license or the data storage, and in terms of that aspect, how that will be going to influence or affect the customers?
That's not a question I can answer. I guarantee you Microsoft can't answer it either. 5 years is too long. I mean, they change it every year. So there's just no way to know.
No, actually, I'm looking at that aspect, and not looking at the prices, but what will be in your view regarding this plan, moving everything towards their ecosystem and taking every control and.
Like I said before, that's where everything is headed, but I can't tell you what they're going to do with it and how they're going to do it. So, okay. Sooner or later they're going to stop, producing on-premise versions, I would imagine, but that's probably years down the road. I don't think it's going to be anything different.
Okay. That's for me. Thank you so much.
Bet. Kurt, did you have something to say? All right. Okay.
No.
Nope. Okay. Let's see. Sanford asked again, how would you get around that timeout or code around the timeout? If you're coding and you run into a timeout, there's actually a specific timeout error, and you just have to watch for it. And when you get it, just retry it. The easiest thing to get around a timeout is to just do it in small batches, but it depends on the operation. Anything else? No, here's one, John. This is a great question. Does reassigning a record also cascade to reassignment down to the child records? That 100% depends on the relationship. So every relationship has a thing at the bottom of the page called cascading rules, and it will tell you exactly how things happen. So the default is a specific way. In many cases, you can change the default. If you have an existing CRM, you have to check to make sure people did not already do that. A common thing is they want when something happens to the parent, they want so like a account. If I reassign account, I want the children, the contacts to be reassigned or not reassigned. I've actually got a really great article that I've got to write about that specific thing, about not reassigning contacts when the parent account is reassigned, which is the default, which can create some really odd situations depending on your ownership. And so I need to write that out. So thanks for reminding me. Sonali says, does Dynamics 365 field service offer truck routing? If you're talking about hazardous chemicals, the answer is no. And so basically, if that's what you're talking about, large trucks that carry hazardous chemicals, so that could be explosives, different things where they won't let you go through specific parts of town. So most of them, you have to go around the city center, not through the city center. You'll see these big signs on American freeways that have HC. That's a designated route for chemicals that they don't want distributed. That does not. That did come up because there's a couple companies out there that have software to do that. It's kind of a specific thing, and so right now they don't do it. But what would be really cool is for the companies who have that software to create an interface with our routing engine. And I thought that somebody told me one time they were going to try to make the routing engine open to where you could use the Microsoft version or somebody else's, that would be really cool where that would work. But to my knowledge right now, that does not happen. Jafar John asks, are the Power Apps Microsoft Flow paid services or are they provided with Dynamics 365 licenses? The answer is it depends. Most of the time, they're actually part of the Dynamics 365 licenses. Flow, I think, is now. Power Apps definitely is, and I think Flow is now too. When you ask, is the Dynamics 365 is rendering the hierarchical view? Yes, there's a hierarchical view of the data within Dynamics 365, but you have to have everything connected. And when you have a hierarchical view, it will actually show an icon to the left of the record. You click on that, and you actually get the hierarchical view page. See, Bruno asks, I would like to know your opinion of having tri-catch blocks inside plugins for CRM. This is something you use. So in plugins, the reason you would have a tri-catch block is to catch things that you know are going to happen. And so you can actually intercept them and have it not throw an error. Other than that, what I do, all mine, they actually capture the error and then they will deconstruct it because some of the exceptions that Dynamics 365/CRM throw have an inner exception that actually has the real error message in it. So when you see a problem has occurred, there's an inside error message that has the real error message in it. They've gotten better at showing the real error message, not just the general error message, but sometimes you have to go and dig it out. So I have code that I've modified that came out of the SDK that will show me that inner exception. And then what I do, I throw an SDK exception or a plugin exception so that that error message is surfaced. That's how I do it. John asks, does learning path usage apply to any portal that is open on non-licensed user? John, learning path doesn't show up on the portal, so you have to be a CRM user. If it shows up on the portal, I don't know about it, so somebody can correct me. Yeah, back to the hierarchical view. Yeah, there's actually a different form for that you can actually control the card. So what information you have. Okay. Anything else? Well, if that's it, I will appreciate you coming today. And like I said, I'll get these questions kind of filled out, and this will be the first part of the Ask Mitch stuff. And then what I'm going to do is open it up and start getting questions before I do everything else. Oh, Sonali asks, do enterprise and business editions use the same data model? Yeah, there's only one CRM data model. So, yep, that was it. Okay, everybody. I really appreciate it.